Hi scholars, it's Dr. Kennedy. I'm going to review Module 3 out of Critical Thinking About Social Problems. And Module 3 looks at the power of culture, meaning how culture influences our lives. And it particularly examines three major aspects of our culture, and that is how we identify as far as our race and ethnic background, as well as our gender and sexuality, and lastly, our social class. So the chapter really begins by giving you some fundamental concepts about what culture is, the different characteristics and traits that comprise culture. So if you look at page 34 of the text, it looks like this. And it is table 3. Table 3 has all the different aspects of culture, from values, beliefs, norms, as well as language and artifacts, the material goods. And it gives you different examples of each of those to explain what you might see or find in society that fits each of those categories. So if you're looking at the table, you're going to see that values, the definition, is kind of an ideal practice or a standard of behavior like morality. And it gives you an example like equality, freedom. So those are examples of values. So the table kind of explains all the different parts of culture, which then ties into the areas that we address with race and ethnicity, gender, sexuality, and social class. And the reason that they're associated is if you think about your different racial or ethnic background, depending on what that is, you're taught different values and beliefs and different rules within that culture. So for example, I am of Mexican descent, and one of the norms of behavior is when you are confronted with someone in authority, you're supposed to be careful with your eye contact. So you acknowledge in communication, you'll look at somebody, but you don't look at them the entire time that they're speaking. You look down because you're acknowledging that they are the authority figure and you're displaying respect. While in America, in the United States, which is something I had to learn because when I was very young, if someone to an authority, I would look down. And in America, that's disrespectful. The whole time someone's speaking to you, you're supposed to be looking at them in the face and in the eye. And so I had to practice that cultural norm because it was different than how I was taught. And so you'll see that as we go through the rest of the module, even when we get to gender and sexuality, there's different rules based on gender of how you're supposed to behave in society, but that also goes tied into your race and ethnic background, which is also then tied into your economic status, whether you're rich or poor. Each of these things impact your values, your beliefs, your norms. The artifacts, the possessions that you own are also influenced by that. And so the beginning of the module sets it up, what culture is, telling you the difference between what non-material culture, meaning values, beliefs, norms, and language. Those are non-material items. They're not tangible things, even though sometimes we feel like our beliefs are tangible and we can grab them and hold them, right? They're more psychological, some of these things. And then the material goods are the things that you can actually touch, like artifacts. So that would be like food, clothing, things like that. And so underneath, you'll also see on figure 11, kind of representing how different aspects of our lives creates our identity. And these are all spread through culture. So it will show like how the agents of socialization, the major groups, teach us culture. And we learn the culture of our racial ethnic background, our gender, our sexuality, our social class, among other things. There's like aging, region, but the module really focuses on the major three. But it does kind of give you a diagram of the flow of how you're learning all these things about how you're supposed to act and think within your culture. And that also then teaches you what power you have within your cultural group and outside, as well as any privileges. The module later goes on to talk about like ideal culture and real culture. So ideal culture really meaning how we all want to live. So we might be taught something, maybe one of the values that we're taught within our culture is that you're not supposed to lie. You're always supposed to be truthful and honest. And we know that that's an ideal and it's a good moral, ethical value to have. But in reality, real culture, we don't practice that. And it becomes really obvious later when you become a parent that you want to teach your children not to lie. But as a parent, you will actually lie to your children sometimes to protect them. So you'll make up things because you don't want them to cross the street unsupervised. So you might make up a scary story like a witch lives across the street. Poor kids, they're going to be terrified about the neighbor. But those are things that we're doing to protect our children sometimes, but they are lies. And so even though we have this moral value not to lie, in reality, our real culture, sometimes we practice lying. So that explains kind of those two terms that you'll see in the module. Also covers cultural universals. There are things, no matter where you live, whatever your gender is, your social class, your racial, ethnic background, there are cultural elements that we all relate to and understand. So it might be in a different language, but when you talk about birth, it's a universal. Everybody understands that birth means life, right? Giving of life, just like death. So there's certain things culturally that kind of transcend across borders, across traits, and that's all cultural universals really is talking about. Some of the other major aspects are covered are like cultural diffusion, about how we spread culture. So we do learn culture from the agents of socialization, which is mentioned in figure 11, like from your family or friends, work, school. We learn culture that way. But we also impact culture globally. So whatever is happening in the United States culturally influences other parts of the world. Just like whatever is happening in Afghanistan, that influences other parts of the world. And what we're finding, though, is a lot of the world is moving towards advancement. And so they want better forms of communication, travel, technology, and everybody is trying to advance in those areas for different reasons. For some of it, it's just to improve connections, networks, but most of it is driven by capitalism, trying to improve the economic status. So cultural diffusion talks about how long it takes for that culture to spread. So if you live in a remote region of the world that doesn't have technology or the infrastructure for technology, it can happen, but it's a process. Culture takes time to change. And the first things to change are like the artifacts, the material goods. So you can say, we want people in an underdeveloped part of the world to have technology. So you can go in, build the infrastructure, take the equipment, but the hardest part will then get people to change and use it because they're not used to using it. So it's getting to change their thinking and their practices. That diffusion takes longer. And that's true of anything in culture. Let's say you wanted to improve civil rights in the United States. So you start working towards resolving some of the income gap discrepancies between genders. Men make more than women. Statistically, we have longitudinally studied this, and we know that to be a fact. And so let's say we want to make income equal, regardless of what your job or employment is. And so we start making policies and laws to make those changes. And it sounds great, and you might have a lot of people behind it. You might have some against it. But even the people that are for it, it takes time for those policies to change an organization, to change their hiring habits, to make sure that they're paying everyone fairly. So that's what cultural diffusion is. It's just kind of explaining that it takes time for culture to change. And values, beliefs, norms, language, those things take longer than changing our material possessions. If I offer you a new cell phone that does more advanced things, you're willing to give yours up. Even though you love your cell phone right now, you don't want to give it up. You love it. It has everything you are passionate about on it. It's very personal to you. But all you'll do is just save and transfer everything onto the new device. You're ready to give it up because the new device takes better pictures, plays better music, takes better videos, uploads quicker, all this good stuff. So the material stuff is easier for us to transition and change into than everything else.